All right, so we're going to talk a little bit now about adding grain and then also the homework, which homework's pretty straightforward, kind of just like bop, 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 running through some stuff. Um, if you hear some people shouting downstairs from me, it's because it's New York, all right? What do you want? So here we have this picture. It is a extremely heavily retouched photograph. If I go in and turn off that retouching, you can see why, right? Some of it, I don't know, maybe is a little heavy-handed, um, but whatever. I don't know when this is from. 10 years ago? 15 years ago? It is what it is. But the important thing to note is that it is not realistic looking. So if we zoom in here, right, there are areas which seem crisp, and then there are areas right next to them which seem kind of fuzzy and mushy, right? Because there's a lot of blur going on. Like, we had a lot to overcome in this picture. Now, most people, are they going to notice that? No, man. Most people don't notice anything. They are just dumb as a sack of hair. Excuse me. But I'm not, and I'm the one looking at your files, so you got to like edit them for me, not for the dumb people out there. So how are we going to overcome this, right? How are we going to make this look less ridiculous with these super blurred, soft, mushy areas and then crispy areas? So the best way that I have handy to do this is by adding a grain layer, right? Now you can add noise or grain or whatever to my underlying pixel layers, but that's not great, right? Because it's not non-destructive. If I add that to my actual pixel layers, if I decide to go back and change it later, up shit creek. So what I want to do is add it in a way that is non-destructive, that I could go back and take it away later on. Why? Well, I mean, you may print it out and decide that it's too much or not enough, but it's also going to be something where it's going to be dependent on the size of your output. So if I print it really big, I probably want to have less of that noise, grain stuff than I do if I print it really small, right? If it's really small, it's going to be hard to see it unless it's more pronounced. If I print it really big, even if it's fairly subtle, it's going to be more visible. So being able to go back in and undo that is going to be helpful. Also, maybe you'll just do it wrong and it'll look wrong, and then you'll want to fix it, and you don't want to start the whole process over again because that's a pain in the ass. So how do we do it? Here we've got all of our lovely layers up here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a layer on top of everything. Right? Everything. And I'm going to do it in a slightly unusual way, right? I'm not going to make a layer by going down and clicking on the plus in the box. I'm going to come up here to the layer menu. You will need to do this on the layer menu. And I'm going to say new and new layer. Now, the reason I do that is it gives me this dialog box that I would not get otherwise. I'm not going to get this dialog box by hitting the plus in a box. So I get this new layer dialog box, and I'm going to call this layer grain. I'm going to come down here to mode, very important, and I'm going to go down here and select overlay. This is the whole important thing, and then I'm going to turn off my text messages so that you do not find out about all the exciting parties I'm going to, because then you would feel bad and you'd be like, oh man, he's so old and he's going to all these cool parties, like damn. All right, so call the grain, set it to mode overlay, and then also very important, I'm going to come down here and check fill with overlay neutral color, 50% gray. Hit OK, double check again that it's on the top of my layer stack, which it is, that's great. And if I look at that, if I go ahead and set that mode from overlay to normal, right? It's just a big solid gray layer. So what the overlay blending mode does, blending mode's very powerful. I'm going to be an adult and admit I don't really understand a lot of them, right? Like, I don't know. Like, if you're a professional retoucher, you are all about the blending modes. You're like, oh man, set that to soft light, right? And you tell me that, and I'm like, okay. But they are a really useful way to do things. If you are a professional retoucher, you will get more into them, and then you can come back and laugh at me, and that will be fine. But the overlay one, the way that it works, you have this 50% gray. Anything that is lighter than 50% gray, right? Any pixel area, brush, whatever, that is lighter than 50% gray is going to lighten the pixels beneath it. Anything darker is going to darken the pixels beneath it. There are some people who use this as a way to dodge and burn. I'm not going to do that. But we are going to use that here for making grain. So I've got that overlay neutral color fill on that layer. I have that layer set to overlay for its blending mode. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to the filter menu, come down here to noise, and select add noise, right? So filter, noise, add noise, and I'm making sure that I'm on that grain layer, right? I don't want to add layer to my other pixel layers. I just want to add that noise to my overlay blending mode grain layer. So add noise, bloop. And one of the things that you'll notice is that almost without even thinking, which is why I didn't mention it, I have my image zoomed in a lot, right? So I am going to put this in here probably a little bit more than 100%. So zoomed in a little bit past 100% with the sort of zoom tool, right? If I hit 1, that's 100%, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit plus again, command 1, command plus, to come in a little bit tighter than that. And the reason for that is that if we zoom way out, all this noise that we're adding, our screen isn't going to be able to represent it, right? Our screen's DPI is very low compared to our print. Our print maybe is 300, 360, whatever. Our screen's like 72 DPI, right? Okay, maybe it's a little bit higher, whatever. But it's not going to be able to show us that level of detail that we will be able to see in the final print. So if we zoom out, right, we're losing the ability to see what our print is going to actually look like. So I zoom into 100%, and then I boost it a little bit more. And you can see here in my add noise window, yours probably does not have monochromatic checked, and I'm not sure what the default values for this are, but if I check and uncheck preview, you'll see that sort of pattern, speckly pattern go across it. So I'm going to make sure that I do check monochromatic, right? And I think you'll be able to see that the noise or texture or grain that's being added goes from being RGB when it's not checked to being black and white when it is checked. I'm also going to say the distribution should be Gaussian. That means that it is more or less randomly distributed. And then the amount, you can play with that, right? I think that's too much. So down here below, we had it at, I think I had it at 6%. All right, maybe we'll try 11%. What do I have in the handout? 14%. Well, okay, I'm going with the handout. I'm going to say 14. Okay. So what this does is on this overlay neutral fields, overlay blending mode layer, right, I've now added noise, and that has made some of the pixels lighter than 50%, some of the pixels darker than 50%. And that lightness and darkness is then being transferred to the underlying image. So I'm essentially adding some kind of grain to the entire image below. And what that does is that it ties together the entire surface. So other areas that previously had been super blurry and smoothed out versus nice and crispy and detailed, now both of them have this texture to them. Excuse me. Now I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. Is that too much grain? Yeah, frankly, it probably is. But let's take a look at it. So once we have that grain in place, right, I cannot, this is a little frustrating, I can't go back in and adjust the amount. I would need to delete the layer and redo that process of making a new overlay 50% blah, blah, blah layer and adding noise to it. But that's better than having to redo my entire file. But what I can do here is I can go ahead and I can take the opacity of that grain layer down a little bit. And I can also, excuse me, take that grain layer and blur it just a little bit, right? I don't want to blur it very much or it's going to completely go away. But let's say I do 0.5. Okay. So now I have something which, if I turn that grain layer on and off, right, relatively subtle, right, feels kind of like film grain. I'm going to go ahead and say that I think that's a little bit too much. I'm going to redo the thing where I threw away that layer, make sure I'm up here on the top, layer, new, layer, grain, mode, overlay, fill with overlay neutral color. If you're like, wow, this is a real pain in the ass to do every time, you can just go and make an action. If you're like, how do I do that? Well, I'm not going to tell you right now, but you can go Google it. And then noise, add noise. And let's do half as much, 8. All right, that looks a lot better. I could try blurring that to see if that's going to be better. Not sure how small of an amount of blur I can get. I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to cancel that. And instead of blurring it, I'm going to drop the opacity down. There, that looks good. Okay, so now if I look at this image, right, I don't see what I saw before, if I hide this, which is a sudden radical shift between these sort of soft and crispy areas. Instead, I see something that looks like film grain across the entire image, and it really ties it together. Adding grain is a great way to overcome some softness that you might run into in an image. Is it an ideal solution? No, the ideal solution is to shoot the right picture at the beginning and not have to deal with any of this crap, right? If I had photographed her before all the dancing, she would not look all sweaty and rough, and I wouldn't have had to do all that retouching. But life is not always perfect, and so we have grain. Okay, so that is the excitement of adding grain. Go ahead and save that. Drop it in the box. I'm not going to save it. And I'm going to go on and show you assignment 3.5, which is our quick running through all the filters homework, in just a sec.